English translation 844th Contact Friday, the 5th of May 2023, 1811 HRS.
I heard you slam the parlor door. That's the only reason I came in and greeted you with the, "Aha, it's you," and left straight away to come here to the office. But now be properly greeted and welcomed.
I also want to greet you and thank you for your welcome.
Thank you, you too, but I thought you were not coming back until July. Is something happening?
You can say that, but it is actually the bringing to pass of what is unpleasant. The board instructed me concerning the matter. Also, other things are to be said, because since everything developed differently on Earth, since Sfath—
I see you obviously want to say what has developed differently since then. I mean what has developed in an unpleasant process since Sfath left. It's true that what Sfath and I saw at that time frightened us, and—
Exactly. I also want to talk about that. How you are being visited by the man who has already visited you once, who now wants to explain to you some things that have arisen in the course of time concerning the harmful energies. Also, and this is probably the most important thing, I have been ordered by the committee to explain to you the following concerning what will be said tomorrow evening by the Core Group 49 at the zoo.
I know that, and we will do what is necessary. This will come as a surprise to some, because so far I have only informed the persons in the office of the President, the Actuary, and the Treasurer, but also only as far as it was necessary. Of course I have not said what is behind all this, because this is also not a matter for the association, but important, and only a group matter is what is required according to the statutes.
That is the point of it, and to explain further is that it can as also the it should also—
Of course, that is perfectly correct. But I will not write down these facts when I recall our conversation, but I will make my usual dots. However, it will probably be good if I write down the important things I have to say about everything, and act according to them, and do so without interfering myself. Besides, as head of the FIGU, as after my departure also the president of the FIGU Association, I have no voting rights. And that is good, because it means that nothing can be directed, that is to say determined from above. But it is always the case that only the group decides something with a yes or no through a unified resolution. The leadership, that is to say presidency, always only has to perceive the group decisions, and always has to be concerned to implement them in reality, that is to say to make sure that they are followed. The leadership or presidency has to present its concerns as an agenda item to the actuarial office, which in turn has to present the concern to the group at the next meeting, and the group then has to decide on the yes or no vote. This should never be changed, because this rule actually prevents a person or an elite belonging to him from seizing the helm of power and acting as the ruling force, as is the case with state governments, leading to injustice, discord, hatred, revenge, retaliation, persecution, murder and manslaughter, and even war and destruction. What would be important is that the peoples would not be so lax and only make their fist in the sack, but remove unfit and autocratic rulers from their offices. To demonstrate and shout about in a stupid way and to believe in a stupid way, and to delude oneself that the wrong governing rulers of both sexes will be impressed by this, is more than just stupid stupidity and cowardice. And unfit soul rulers do not only exist in various countries of the earth, but there are elements unfit to govern in every government of all states, also here in Switzerland. In many cases, they are nobodies and non-entities from the large part of the ignorant and uneducated people, who may have attended schools to learn the lowly education of reading and writing, etc., but who have no ability whatsoever to learn and work out for themselves how to run a state. If, in this respect, one thinks of elements such as Joseph Stalin, the shoemaker's son and dictator of the USSR, whose real name was actually Ioseb Vissarionovich Djugashvili, and who was born in the small Caucasian town of Gori, which at that time belonged to the Russian Empire, today Georgia, then Adolf Hitler, who was Austrian, but who was then a Nazi dictator in Germany, who failed in secondary schools and was called Schicklgruber as an illegitimate, but who took his father Hitler's name at the age of 40. Then also Saddam Hussein, who was the son of a poor peasant family, also Nicolae Ceausescu, who was the son of a peasant farmer from Wallachia, later Romania, not ultimately, but still named Francisco Franco, who was the son of a bon vivant and naval officer, who resisted convention and a deeply religious mother. And with regard to the present, the clown and actor Volodymyr Oleksandrovich Zelensky should be mentioned, who, as the son of a cyberneticist and an engineer, is a war criminal and a straw man of America, and has drawn many government officials of various countries to his and America's side in Ukraine, who are stupidly and carelessly supplying him with weapons and are guilty of the fact that the Ukrainian war has now been going on for so long, instead of the fact that it would have been over and finished after only 16 days without the arms supplies of the irresponsible powerful of other states. And here, this letter that was leaked to me speaks its own language about what this Zelensky really is, namely not just a clown. If I may read it to you, for it is written in German not very well but still to be understood, if I can read it well and to some extent also in German.
You can.
Good. It is from a woman called, and she writes in addition to the fact that she has to have this letter written, obviously by someone who does not really know German either, because she herself does not speak German. I am very well acquainted with Volodymyr Zelensky, but you do not have to mention that. I mean my name. So I see a lot of you on the pages where you have many newspaper articles and you can also show what I say, what you really have to do. I know Volodymyr very well, and I know from him how he thinks, and he wants to destroy Germany, and as a Jew, he wants revenge for everything, because the Nazis murdered millions of Jews, and many Germans of today are no better. So he thinks like that and demands weapons from the Germans, which they also give to him. And he says that they will also hit Russia with them, which helped the Allies from the West to eliminate the Nazis in the Second World War. Even today there are still stupid Nazis in the government, and they do not realize that Volodymyr is only using them so that Russia can also be destroyed, and that they are falsely thanking Russia for helping to put an end to the war. That's all I really want to read out, but if you want to read for yourself? On the whole, however, if I understand correctly, I find that Germany is supplying weapons to Zelensky as thanks for the fact that Russia, together with the Allies, helped to defeat the Nazis and thus ended the war, and precisely that in this process the present Nazi government of Germany, as Ta calls it, is thanking the Russians for having helped to end the Nazi existence and Nazi murder, and to pacify Germany again. Truly, however, if this is so, then the neo-Nazi government of Germany, as Ta calls it, is working underhandedly to punish Russia because its army, in the last World War, together with the Allies of the West, defeated the Nazis and collapsed the Nazi system. By supplying weapons to Zelensky, the neo-Nazis can now take revenge on Russia in this manner, because the weapons will be used against the Russian army. Zelensky is really clever and sneaky, because in this manner he strikes two blows at the same time and can take revenge on Germany, which the stupid people in the government do not notice and do not realize that Germany is once again being made a pig of and is falling behind enormously and is once again making itself the enemy against Russia. However, the fact that since the end of the war America has still been squatting in Germany as the main occupation, conducting it politically, and using it underhandedly today, in order to use the clown and warmonger Zelensky in Ukraine as a straw man for the war against Russia, so as not to have to step directly into the limelight and admit that behind everything there is only the America hegemony known from time immemorial, is not recognized by the stupid rulers of Germany, nor by the EU dictatorship powers. Besides, I think the Jew hatred will break out again on a large scale, because the mere fact that Zelensky is a Jew, and that he is a warmonger, who is sneakily and vindictively abusing the neo-Nazis in the German government, as is written in the letter, will set the devil loose all over again. That is what I think, because it will not do with the fact that Jew hatred has been festering for centuries, brought about the Holocaust, and with it some 4 million dead Jews, as well as some 60 million others dead worldwide. The mere fact that the neo-Nazis in Germany are supplying weapons to Zelensky, not to Ukraine, but really to the warmongering Zelensky, only brings treacherous America closer to its delusion of hegemony. This with the additional help of all those states that supply weapons to Zelensky, and thus effectively and truly wage war against Russia. The claim that this is not the case is nothing more than an infamous lie and deception, because the West is effectively waging war against Russia, insidiously steered by America, which in its hegemony, mania has known no limits since time immemorial, and is supported by the majority of Americans. The minority, however, which is against all the delusions of world domination, the wars and everything violent, unjust, inhumane and evil that America organizes in its own country and in the whole world, has no chance whatsoever to break through in order to shape everything for the better and humane. On the contrary, they will be harassed and punished if they even say something that does not suit those who always refer to national security, and above all to God, and believe that America has the sole right to be able to direct the world. Not only politically, but also with the military and its wars, etc., with the murderous secret services, as well as with the sex and the delusion of God, for which they walk over not only millions, but effectively over many billions of corpses worldwide. Oh.
No, it is too much of what you have read as it is. What you have heard says enough, both with regard to Zelensky and also with regard to America, which you have now mentioned. Moreover, everything is indisputable, just as it is indisputable that the West and America in the front line is waging war against Russia. For what the Western states allow themselves to do, namely to supply weapons, etc., to Zelensky, are effectively acts of war and an open war against Russia, which, however, is a new kind of warfare as it appears on Earth for the first time. Moreover, it is worth mentioning that the weapons are effectively being delivered to Zelensky, as you say, not to the state of Ukraine, most of whose population wants nothing to do with the war, as we explored.
I also know that because that's what various people in Ukraine told me when I was there with Bermunda and also with Florina. There were even people who said that this Zelensky should be taken by the devil, because he only brings suffering and fear as well as death, ruin and destruction over the whole country, as well as that America is behind everything, and that this should also be taken by the devil. Zelensky, he said, was only a straw man of America, and moreover greedy for power and even more stupid than stupid. But this letter here, I will destroy it now if you do not want to read it, because I do not want anyone else to get hold of it and the woman to get into the devil's kitchen. Therefore,
even if you tear it into such small pieces now,
don't worry, I will still burn the cutlets.
That's what I was going to recommend.
I was just thinking of that myself because I know what caution takes. But now back to what I was actually talking about. What has become of the good-for-nothings of the people, namely not only dictators, but mass murderers and destroyers of a great many human achievements, is world-famous. But the idiots of many states of arms suppliers to Zelensky are so stupid that they do not realize the truth, especially that America is behind it all and wields the scepter of it all in order to indulge in hegemony. Like many others, however, most of the powerful in the state governments have no idea of how the countries must be run, because they have no leadership qualities whatsoever. Moreover, they are often just puppets of other states, just as the ineffectual Zelensky in Ukraine is just a straw man of the Americans. Those who are or were once at the helm of power are let off the hook and spared and protected from any punishment, as is happening in Switzerland, for example, because despite evil misconduct, no measures were taken. This, as also not when neutrality was brought to bear by the EU dictatorship against Russia with the adoption of sanctions, thereby making a pig of Switzerland's neutrality, and certain states had declared themselves the enemy against Switzerland. Nevertheless, those misfits and government incompetents who are squatting in power, who, like all rulers, should undoubtedly be a role model for the people, are behaving completely against all rules of ethics and morality with their actions, posturing and behavior. Nevertheless, these fallible rulers are left scot-free when they commit a crime and should be punished for it. This is irrespective of whether they have managed to get themselves to the helm of government, or whether they have been put in power through elections, etc. So the holders of government power are women. So the government power holders, female and male, are spared and not punished, as opposed to all that when an ordinary citizen does the same, or even less than what the power seekers have done, they are made to pay or put in jail for it. This is an injustice beyond compare. So where is equal rights for all? Nowhere. The same kind of evil deeds that those in power do and are neither reprimanded nor punished are punished with severe penalties such as imprisonment or fines. As a rule, the purpose of punishment is to make people think twice about what they have done wrong, and to prevent them from doing it again, which is nothing other than retribution. In America, for example, ex-President Trump is left free and scot-free, although he is liable as the author of the storming of the Capitol, while those from the people who followed his call are maltreated with years in prison. Or when one thinks of Germany, where former Chancellor Merkel launched the welcome culture for refugees, which has since flooded Germany and Europe in general from Africa and other poor countries, with hundreds of thousands and even millions of economic refugees, thousands of whom die on the way, mostly drowning in the Mediterranean, then one truly has to ask where justice is. The whole thing has nothing to do with humanity, just as it has nothing to do with helping the human beings, for truly the refugees usually run from one misery to another, or go to their deaths, as I have already said. So the pretended humanity is nothing but a lie of this Mrs., a deliberate inhumanity in order to make herself seem great and to present herself as the savior of many human beings, whereas in reality these human beings end up in misery or in death. But this does not matter to this Mrs., that all human beings are equal before the law, and that all are punished equally for the same law-breaking and misdeeds is only a pious lie and fantasy, because depending on the status of office, activity, and monetary wealth, the human being on earth is punished or protected for an unjust deed. This, in any case, if the person in question is not one of the common people, who is automatically burdened with the harshest punishments as soon as he does something that is not necessarily righteous, and this regardless of whether he knows or not that it corresponds to right or wrong. In particular, however, those human beings are neither reprimanded nor punished who hold higher offices or hold a position in government, or are even the rulers themselves. And this is also the case in Switzerland, as has been proven, since fallible persons are simply let off the hook even in government, even though they have done wrong and even endangered the peace of the country to the outside world. Or others want to do so because they are under the delusion that they have to barter Switzerland away to the EU-Europe dictatorship.
Introducing the no-vote rule as an unbreakable rule was your idea, but it has worked out very well, as we know, as your work that you have been doing since—
You can leave that. All that matters is that everything is correct and works well.
That is correct, but—
It does not need to be. What had to be done was done, and that's that. Basta. That's all there is to it.
You want to—
Nothing more to say. That's what you want to say. But what is important is that what had to be done was done. But what you mentioned, that somebody wants to come here from the little ones, I think I already know. And I am probably correct in assuming that the religious energies are to blame for the fact that since the last World War, everything has been getting more and more out of hand, and the overpopulation has increased so rapidly. When I consider that at the time when Sfath went his last way, there were about 2.7 billion people on Earth, which was already over 4 times more than is sustainable for a planet like Earth, and now there are as many as 9.25 billion, which is about 19 times too much for the Earth, the ecosystems, and thus for the fauna and flora, and thus for the whole of nature and its living beings. Then it is possible to understand all the misery that the Earthlings have caused on this planet. So in just 70 years, humanity has gone from 2.7 billion to more than 9 billion, to the detriment of the planet, all its ecosystems, all of nature, its fauna and flora, the atmosphere and the climate. But this goes much further, because the hatred of the Earthlings has also increased immensely, as have the wars, intrigues, crime and all other evil. The murders, which are constantly increasing, with the murderers being younger and younger, even children, who kill their own kind. This, as well as, in general, discord and xenophobia, as well as racial hatred and greed for money have become rampant, whereby in the past only thousands of francs or dollars played an important role, but then hundreds of thousands, then quickly millions, which just as quickly became hundreds of millions. Today it's billions, and in the case of the super-rich, hundreds of billions. The other day, Michael also asked me what could have caused the blatant change to why today humanity is surrendering to the earth in degenerate and evil ways, and why the world is being completely destroyed. In response, I could only tell him what I know and also think, namely that everything can only be based on the fact that the religious delusion has driven human beings to all evil and to the destruction of the planet, of all ecosystems, of nature, and of the fauna and flora, as well as to the serious degenerations of the human beings of the earth, and which it now continues to drive without hesitation. In this I think that it is not the delusion of God itself, but the religious energies that are released from it and have a malicious destructive effect on the human beings, and impregnate their minds with hatred, revenge, retaliation, xenophobia, racial hatred, enmity, rage, and destructive mania, and cause them to go berserk. This harmful and destructive religious energy, this delusional energy of faith, also produces a mania for flight, as a result of which many human beings are seized by fear and flee from their home countries, because they are tormented by fear of no longer having a future in their home country, and of perishing. Thus, since the beginning, and still today, and even further into the future, they have sought their salvation in fleeing to industrialized countries, tormented by fear, or in false hope for a better life. They do this as economic refugees in economically better-off countries, where they want to seek their fortune, but very many lose their lives on their flight, and thus never reach the destination of their hopes and dreams. Frau Merkel, however, did not care, because she did not give it a single thought from the very beginning, just as she will never give it a thought.
It will be as you say.
Yes, unfortunately, nothing is done by the peoples to avoid all the evils done by governments. Just as idiotic votes and so elections are accepted by the peoples, instead of being rejected when these are arrived at by the most diverse parties, and the peoples are enlightened by misstatements concerning all the values of the same. The peoples do not think independently for the whole. Consequently, they simply vote according to the propaganda of lies, instead of considering the whole in a real and reasonable way, and nipping the evil in the bud. Also the idiocy that is to come in June here in Switzerland, because stupid, crazy, and non-thinking people are having a vote held on an energy initiative that has not been considered in terms of its consequences, because the lunatics are incapable of considering this. The lunatics launching the whole thing to ban petrol vehicles, oil heaters and diesel oil vehicles, etc. is beyond idiotic, and proves how short-sighted and stupidly stupid the initiators of this vote are, who would cause a nationwide disaster with their crazy idea if this came about. So it is only to be hoped that there will be enough sensible voters who will reject the idiotic request of the stupid dimwits, and act according to what has been said since time immemorial. Nip all idiocy in the bud.
But that is not being done.
Of course not, because otherwise there would not be this chaos everywhere. The fanaticism of faith and religion alone, as well as the too rapid development of technology, electronics, and now the coming artificial intelligence, which will dangerously rise above the rudder of reason and bring death and destruction, as well as the flooding and false humanity taking place in Europe regarding economic refugees, are increasingly taking over and bringing more and more unsolvable problems with them. It is still not enough that the Earth's population is already 19 times above what the Earth can bear. The idiotic demonstrations of the last generation and other environmentalists who do more harm than good are sick in the head and achieve exactly the opposite of what should be done. Let the IPCC be told. It is not too late to stop climate change if it is concerned about stopping the progress of overpopulation, because all the evil results from overpopulation. What emerges from the main message of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC in its synthesis report that should be taken into account. And as far as the corona vaccine damage is concerned, the fact that hundreds of thousands, even millions are suffering from it today, is denied, as is the fact that many died from it, also in Switzerland, as well as the fact that many have to bear lifelong after effects. Because those responsible for the health authorities, as I said, vehemently deny the truth. Various governments of various countries still collected for their lies, as well as for the fact that they knew in the early days that only distilled water was used as a vaccine, because no vaccine was available at all. So the whole thing was something that was, of course, completely useless. It usually takes vaccine researchers 10 to 15 years before anything useful or even beneficial is researched. But in the case of the corona rampantly spreading disease, it was vaccinated against before it had really broken out worldwide as an actual pandemic and had never been researched before. Nothing is effectively being done for peace either, because in this respect too, exactly the opposite is happening. War. Truly, something must be done for peace. Above all, peace must first be created within oneself. Then not only externally, for peace is not created with wars, for only murder and destruction take place, and in the process, one country triumphs over the other, which is then imposed with sanctions. However, this does not create peace, but only victory over the other party or state, which is not an iota of peace, but only a war-free state of calm, in which, however, a new debacle is always lurking underground and can break through. For this reason alone, wars and battles should not be fought by the people, who very quickly, murderously, and destructively promote every mischief immeasurably, but only by the governmental opponents. Consequently, no country would need an army and not billions of money for it, as mass suffering and deaths and destruction could also be avoided.
Regarding peace, you wrote something in 2018 that you should mention again here in our conversation, because not enough can be said in this regard. Besides, they are very good words that you have quoted.
What do you mean by that? Honestly, I do not remember that very well because I have considerable difficulties with memory in relation to my brain stroke.
Find it, then use it here in my remarks when you recall our conversation and write it down.
Okay, I will. It's beginning to dawn on me. If I remember, yes, I think I remember. Because I think it was when I was talking to Ptah about how Earthlings always need a reminder that they need to be reminded regarding the need for peace.
That may be, I do not know, because I was not there.
So I will find it out and put it here.
Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Sim Yase Silver Star Center, Hinter Schmidruti 1225, 8495 Schmidruti ZH Schweiz, Switzerland. Peace.
True peace can only come about on Earth among the world's population, when every sensible and reasonable human being finally takes the first non-violent step towards it without violence, in order then to take every further step in peace and consciously to the final consequence of peace.
Sim Yase Silver Star Center, the 10th of September 2018, 1643 HRS, Billy Human Beings of the Earth.
Do not indulge in hatred, revenge, retaliation, and destruction, but might make within yourselves and yourselves a hearth of love, happiness, and peace. Banish within yourselves hatred, revenge, and retaliation, and stop everything that brings death, sorrow, suffering, misery, and destruction. Do not create discord, strife, war, and destruction and wretchedness, gloom, harm, affliction, distress, and pain, but grow beyond yourselves and be greater in yourselves than your enemies and all antagonists. Only those who are weak seek in hatred, revenge, and retaliation to gain a victory, his right, satisfaction, and contentment, but in doing so he destroys his right and creates injustice, which makes him an enemy of his fellow man and the spawn of evil, but might also make him an outcast in society. Create justice and peace in yourselves and in the world. Do not judge. And recognize that those who harm you are poor in their thoughts, decisions and actions, for they are weak, wretched. In their speech, as well as incompetents and bunglers in their actions. Create in yourselves love, happiness, and peace. Be good and do right in your thoughts, decisions, and actions. If you are self-confident and blameless and are without guilt, if you justly defend yourselves against injustice done to you in a controlled manner, without strife, war, death, violence, or destruction, for such only brings new strife, warfare, and death. Be true and effective human beings who protect the precious life of every single human being from mischief and death, as you give yourself all protection and keep yourself from all harm, for your neighbor is a human being like yourself.
Sim Yasay Silver Star Center 10.3 2022 1251 HRS Billy.
You will surely...
Just leave it. It will be like I have written it down in the computer somewhere too, and I will find it.
That will be so. But then I have a few questions. You were together in ancient and very early times, so also in places that no longer exist, such as Atlantis and...
Yes, Plato still described that. Consequently, I was already interested in it as a boy. But they were different places and settlements that were called Atlantis, and were very far apart. They were all smaller and larger places, but the actual Atlantis that Plato wrote about was not just a place or a city, but...
I am aware of that. But there is also a record of Sfath, and that is a note concerning a man called Tesla, whom you were able to meet, who according to my research today is credited with strange inventions. For example, an apparatus which is said to have produced so-called death rays, and to have been called a death ray. What do you know about it? Do you have any knowledge about it? And what was the other?
Sfath told me to keep quiet regarding such things, and not to tell anything that could somehow be invented for weapons development and killing. Tesla and I met Sfath when he was tinkering, and we suddenly appeared out of nowhere, which frightened him immensely. It took him a long time to recover from his fright, and it was only when Sfath beamed him and me into his pearship and circled the planet that he calmed down and listened to what Sfath told him. He was then also willing to talk about his inventions and explain everything in detail. Besides, I can say this because there is a lot of talk in the world about the alleged death rays. He told Sfath and me that he was not talking about death rays, but about cathode rays, an invention in the field of electrical power engineering. He told us that a journalist had created the term death rays, and that it had been quickly spread, but that he had really only spoken of a cathode ray, which was really nothing other than an electron ray, which, if I remember half rightly, was an electrical invention, by means of which, on the one hand, a weak bluish illumination of the air could be brought about, but that, on the other hand, it was an electrode, which had a negative pole or so, etc., which was necessary in order to be able, when the light was switched on, to produce an electric current, which was necessary in order, when the electrode was put together with an opposite plasma electrode, to produce a certain whereby A could be produced. Tesla then explained this to us in detail, as well as what the final result was with regard to the invention in this respect, and what resulted from it, and what could be done with it, etc., about which, however, I had to promise him not to speak. Namely that I would keep my mouth shut for the rest of my life and never say anything. That is because, that on the one hand, on the other hand also because, so it is that what he really invented, developed further, and which was very effective, something that, but this is to be kept quiet about, especially because it really worked, as he demonstrated to Sfath and me and also explicitly explained to us all his plan records in this regard, but which he earnestly declared he would destroy, because he could not bear the responsibility that through his invention, the irresponsible as well as the power-hungry and military of the world could not only endanger all existence of humanity, but even destroy the planet. Therefore, I will say nothing more about his inventions, which he developed much further and more precisely than was known, although Sfath advised him not to reveal this, as well as nothing about the possible applications. Since then, these have only triggered conjecture, lies, or simply nothing more than partly wild fantasies, which cannot be further than far from the truth. In particular, I am thinking of the fantasy story about the allegedly disappeared warship, whose alleged reappearance was supposed to have fused some of the crew members with the metal of the ship, which corresponds to an unparalleled nonsense. Clearly, however, I may say that Nikola was not an extraterrestrial, and he also had no inspiration from extraterrestrials, which also applies to Albert Einstein, to make the inventions, which, however, is claimed to the contrary by delusionists and believers. In addition to all this, I think it should be mentioned that if the foreigners, who were already spread all over the earth in ancient times, and some of whose distant ancestors in the Indus Valley in Pakistan did something that could have been avoided if pure reason had prevailed there too, but which is obviously lacking in all human life forms, then many things would have been different since time immemorial. But ignorance and imprudence are a fact that must also be attributed to the old and new foreigners, even if they were technically far ahead of the Earthlings and are still ahead today. They have been circling around in earthly airspace since time immemorial, and thus since time immemorial, but nevertheless they have nothing to do with what is attributed to them in connection with certain Earthlings. But this brings me to something I want to ask you. What do you think it is to assume that other and unknown foreigners are trying to spy on us in the center? Every now and then figures and objects appear out of nowhere and disappear again, and I wonder where they come from. They are certainly not the foreigners we know. It's enough that every now and then helicopters of the...
I know that, but with the figures and the objects, that is unknown to me, and I am also hearing something from you in that regard for the first time.
It has happened several times, which I did not tell you before, that suddenly some figures and objects materialized out of nowhere around the house and disappeared again without a trace. Our surveillance cameras must have picked up on this each time, but they did not record anything, so there is no visual evidence.
That is strange. We also did not notice that a grouping of unknown foreigners. No, I cannot imagine that the foreigners we know are with you. No, they are certainly not interested.
It's just weird. Yeah, well. Let's not do that. Then let's do this, because we were talking about the foreigners. Song-like or simply diffuse and blurred UFO recordings, as well as stupid and confused commentaries and broadcasts, discussions and alleged revelations and stupid claims, or simply harebrained conjectures are broadcast on various TV stations at different times of the day or during the night. So far, however, no real proof has been brought, but only stupid blah-blah from so-called UFO experts, whereby situations and pictures etc. are also reenacted, to show more or less what is supposed to have happened. This also applies to observations, sightings that are said to have been made by dozens or hundreds of human beings. But so far, in all the dozens of broadcasts, nothing concrete has been brought.
To discuss that, I guess we will have to postpone it until one of my next visits because, as you can see here, I'm being called and I have to go back. So, my friend, goodbye.
Goodbye, Quetzal.